Hello, my name is Casey Goldstein, and welcome to my presentation, Successful Onboarding and Coaching for Today's Sales Management Hopefuls, How to Get Your Millennial New Hires Ready for a Leadership Role in Sales. Well, now that the title's been fully read out loud, and I'm probably halfway through the presentation, let's continue. About me. I work full-time at Brother International, which is a printer manufacturer, as a channel coordinator for a sales support team calling on reseller and distributor partners. I'll be using information gathered from my own team and my own managers today to help draw some conclusions. From this brief presentation, I hope we can all conclude with a better understanding of what a millennial is, and even though you can't see me, know that I did just use air quotes, how one might be different from another one of your employees, and how to best structure your training and efforts to get the best results from them. I am myself a millennial, but please trust I made every effort in my research as well as in the composition of this project to fully maintain objectivity. At this time, let's turn our attention to the agenda at the bottom of the slide. As I move through my presentation today, you'll see an arrow guide us along toward the finish line, highlighting which topic I'm currently discussing. An old sales adage that you may know goes, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. So, as you'll see, we're currently looking at the presentation in brief. Next, we're going to move to Who Are the Millennials, which will cover what people think of when they hear the word, and I'll also share my findings on how generations are actually defined, and somewhat controversially among my own friends, whether there's actually an opt-in button or not to being called a millennial. I'm going to be showing you that there's not. Speaking of findings, we'll next move to my existing findings about the millennials. This will cover what researchers have found to be empirically true of my generation, and what just seems to be the stereotypes associated with us. You can see the picture on the right for a hint where the path is going to take you there. Next up will be more findings, this time centered on sales management training and the new hot word in corporate America, onboarding. I'll then share my findings from the surveys and interviews I conducted and use that to get us to adapting for success, which is the big payoff showing a few actionable items to immediately implement in your own workplace, and also what you should not. I'll then do the tell them what you told them piece by summarizing the key takeaways of my presentation, or what I like to call if you're just waking up now and wondering what I've been talking about for the past 15 minutes. I'll also field any questions at that time. However, in the interest of showing the technological reliance so commonly linked to the millennials, you don't need to wait until later to ask your questions or share your comments. To get everyone thinking like a true millennial yourselves, we'll be using the hashtag #millennials to live tweet this presentation right here in the Blackboard chat to your left. You too, Professor. All are welcome. I may not be able to be there in person. I happen to live in New Jersey, and at the time of this presentation, I should be in a DoubleTree hotel in Austin, Texas. I will be fake tweeting alongside you, just like an episode of literally any show that airs on ABC. So, with that, on with the presentation. So, who are the millennials? On this slide, I'm going to shed some light on what it means to be a millennial. To do so, let's step back and see what researchers say it means to be part of a generation. Technically speaking, a generation is an all-encompassing group of people born around the same time that therefore have gone through important life events and milestones around the same years and have experienced the same world events and, let's say, elections around the same ages. For instance, you're probably familiar with the baby boomers, who came to age shortly after World War II, as well as Generation X. Researchers and sociological anthropologists say that the millennial generation was born any time between early 1980s and the early 2000s. That's of course a pretty big time span, so there are bound to be behavioral differences within this blanket group, but that's to be expected. We can look at behaviors and habits in the workplace that seem to relate especially to this group, but it doesn't come close to meaning that it characterizes everyone. I had to be careful when selecting articles to analyze, not to rely on opinion pieces. For the millennial side research, I stuck only to scholarly articles. The reason for this is the overwhelming amount of negative sentiment by older generations about the millennial generation. In case you somehow are not familiar with that sentiment I'm speaking of, I've pulled a few favorite posts from various online sources and put them here in the presentation, such as to the right, to educate and mostly also to entertain. A few key areas of discussion surface from my research, and I've listed these here. Allow me to show you how subjectivity can really murk up the facts. The fact is that millennials are the most highly unemployed generation. Some would say this is because the generation is lazy. Others might say it's because the economy isn't looking its best these days, and that the definition of unemployment is actually the inability to find work despite active pursuit of work. In terms of technology, some see millennials as dependent on social media, smartphones, and their laptops. Others interpret the same increased use of technology as a natural affinity for new technology, not unlike baby boomers loving their record players. We'll take a closer look at generational parallels like this on the next slide. Lastly, studies have shown millennials, especially of college age, have reported heightened expectancies of salaries and promotions quite early in their work years. Several people understandably view this as a sense of entitlement. A cartoon later in my presentation illustrates that some of that perceived entitlement could very well have come from their boomer parents and their affinity for participation trophies. And on the other side of that coin is a generation that could be seen as driven and eager for success, not necessarily feeling it's owed to them. Let's dive in to see what's already known, or for that matter, still not. Most data used as the basis for this slide's discussion is of college-age millennials and those in their first or second year of permanent full-time employment. Because this generation is just entering the workforce now and in recent years, there's no data yet about what they're going to look like as veteran employees, with very few already serving in a director or manager role. So with only the data to go on, here's what we know most of all. The millennial generation is facing a serious obesity problem. Higher weights are being reported, and what's worse, self-identification as overweight or obese has dropped, which means that today's youth is fat but doesn't know it. Why does this have anything to do with the workforce? It would seem that obesity now means chronic absences and higher insurance coverage later that both take a toll on the company. We'll revisit this later in Adapting for Success for some tips on how to overcome this. Another serious evidence-based finding is that unemployment is higher among millennials. I mentioned a moment ago that some people feel this comes across as lazy. These same people also diagnose the millennials with a bad case of Peter Pan syndrome, which is the term used for not wanting to grow up and leave home. Millennials are living at home much further into their careers than had the boomers or Generation X. This changes millennial salary expectations and also how they play the classic childhood game of MASH, as seen on the right. Let's look at the chart on the left to see how some key topics that appeared once to apply just to one generation have manifested themselves differently, but repeatedly over the years. First up is technology. It's no secret that millennials know their way around a computer, much more comfortably so than a Generation Xer. As the first generation really being born into the information age, it's no wonder the proclivity exists. However, it should be noted that Generation X was marked to have a greater technological relationship than did the baby boomers, and the baby boomers more so than what was known as the silent generation before them. As far as self-expression, millennials have been observed to have a lot more tattoos than previous generations. This may be somewhat unique to the millennials, but so was a sudden surge in the popularity of a single earring among Gen Xers, and of course bell-bottom jeans among boomers. With the omnipresence of tattoos among millennials, it's important to remember from an HR standpoint that discriminating against tattoos in all forms limits staffing options, but also can raise issues of age discrimination, with a strong correlation between this generation and their tats. Temperance is what one researcher described as a feeling of self-restraint and control. We've already seen a lacking among the millennial generation as far as obesity due to their eating habits and lack of physical activity. Apparently, this also covers the inability to fully balance screen time with a smart device with engaging in other activities. The boomers were also seen to have an issue with temperance, especially during the days of Woodstock and free love. Lastly, note that millennials favor a smaller power distance in the workplace. This means that they have less objection to engaging comfortably with higher authority players in the office and are more expectant to discuss sensitive information about the company as would any more veteran employee. While neither categorically good nor bad, this is most likely where the stereotype of entitlement is drawn out. Let's take a quick and broad glance at the top sales management training practices currently in effect before diving into my own research. This presentation focuses on best onboarding practices, so let me define that. Onboarding is considered the period between hire and reaching full productivity as an employee. For salespeople, this means the time that they are making all their sales goals like anyone else on their team. Onboarding begins right on day one. As several articles will show, a new hire is poised for success by coming to the office their first day and already having their business cards waiting, the company policies available to them, and their computer configured and ready for use. This eliminates downtime that makes new hires feel useless and sometimes even a little guilty for not working on something. It's recommended if a manager can't be ready to train at 9 a.m. that first day, treat your new hire to a 10 a.m. start time, giving them less sitting around time and you time to prep and maybe check a few important emails. Also important is having a comprehensive handbook. Every single article I found about sales onboarding mentioned some form of handbook or resource to find everything from policies, useful documents and forms, competitive analyses, and more. Millennials have responded favorably to having extremely explicit instructions for any assignment, and I can speak from my own experience leading a team of 5 millennial sales support members that every document I put onto a shared cloud site is 5 less questions I get when a task is set by your manager. A set procedure for getting questions answered and their understanding reviewed should be given out the very first week, and stick to your schedule as you would with any dates you promise to a customer. And more to this point, it's important to make sure that your new hire is aware who their primary contact is for questions and further training. More often today, the trainer, the mentor, and the manager may all be different people. Let's take a look at what some managers and employees at my own company had to say about their own experience with coaching and mentoring. I surveyed 7 employees, all of ages the research classifies as millennials. Most are on my own peer team. We report to a director of retail sales, but most closely work day-to-day with the director of the reseller accounts that we support. Some of the participants are our boss's retail account managers, who report to and work with him. I interviewed as my 2 sales managers, my boss, and the director that we work with closely. The strongest result I got from the interviews wasn't even from one of my questions. Upon hearing the first few questions, my boss asked if he could answer about his retail team instead of my support team, as I had intended, since he felt the coaching questions didn't really apply. I allowed this since I had surveyed his team as well, but what's important to note is that the other director said something similar and said that he's only one of the many coaches for my team and his answers might not be comprehensive. So if neither one of these people are tasked with the primary role of coaching and mentoring my team, who is? Oddly enough, my boss said he felt the company and his team both had formalized coaching programs in place. The other director for our team said no to both of these. Some of the questions I asked the directors were geared toward perceptions of millennial employees as entitled, lazy, and tech-obsessed. Because of my findings on obesity, I also asked about the team's observed eating habits as they may differ from other older employees. My boss found that the millennials' eating habits were reasonably different, 5 out of 7, and that they were slightly reliant on technology and slightly entitled, but slightly unassociated with being lazy. The other director saw no correlation between millennial and other employee eating habits, but also saw a slightly heightened sense of entitlement. Further questioning revealed they did not see this in attitude, but in the prevalence of goals set in annual reviews, always focused on being promoted and never on improvement in their current role. Hardly any disparities existed between survey and interview results. Usually employees are harder on managers in surveys than managers are on themselves, but here employees wrote rave reviews of the managers and scored several 6s and 7s, while the managers stayed more in the 4 and 5 range. The only negative ratings recorded were that the managers do not get coffee or lunch with the team ever, but that's in no way a job requirement. Also worth noting is that those surveyed felt that the managers might not be the best at reading subtext and what is not being said. Both managers did feel for this one trait they were above average at a score of 6, against their staff's answers of unsure and disagree for these statements. So what does all of this mean? Here are the top tips I leave you with to take back to your own team of eager millennials trying to make it as the sales managers of tomorrow. First, don't treat the millennial employees differently from your other employees. It might seem that with each generation being so different in certain ways, that everyone should have their own onboarding structure. Do not treat your employees unequally. Do make sure that your onboarding routine encompasses practices proven favorable by each generation, now to include those that follow for millennials. Coaching is key, and it's not enough to feel that you've been coaching, but have someone assigned on your team to be the coach when you're away. My boss is based in Maryland and our office is in Jersey, and I was actually just appointed into a new role on my team that is responsible for training and development, which means while our boss is still our boss, he's deputized me to keep the coaching going even when he's away. Have a handbook and keep it growing. For the millennials, it would seem an online site is easier than constantly adding copies to a binder, although as a printer salesman, I certainly won't argue with anyone looking to do that much printing. However you interpret it, whenever you find someone asking you for some piece of information, provide it now, but also post it for later so the handbook can evolve with your company or team. And empower your employees to provide some content themselves. Assign out competitors for them to research and post findings on, or ask each team member to become an expert on a different policy and post their summary for the team. With obesity on the rise, physical activity needs to be too. This doesn't mean doing calisthenics during the morning team huddle. although that would be hilarious. This might mean having company programs that incent employees taking the stairs or setting personal goals with their pedometers. The new iPhone has a pedometer built into the device, so if your millennials are as technology dependent as you might think they already are, they already have the tools they need to track and expand their own exercise routine in the workplace. And finally, remember that succession planning is key. Millennials may or may not be entitled, but they are certainly eager to succeed in their roles. My old boss once said of an employee that wasn't quite performing to standard, "No one wakes up and says, 'I'm going to go suck at my job today.' Everyone wants to perform well, and letting your whole team know what position is next on their path and the exact standards that are expected before they're to be considered for that position are easy ways to motivate them toward highest achievement." So that's it. That's what the world knows about millennials. Mostly nothing, with high unemployment rates now and a strong suspicion of obesity down the road. Everybody knows the millennials to be entitled, lazy, and tech-obsessed, but now you know perceptions and stereotypes are not the proper basis of implementing change in the workplace. Well, hopefully you knew that already. To enact real positive change for your employees, you should now know that that starts on day one with your preparedness and the expectations you set. You know not to treat a millennial employee different from another employee joining your team, but that everyone should be made aware not just of their training plan, but of their coaching plan for throughout their role, and your succession plan for where you see them heading next if they play their cards right. I'm sure you're all already eagerly working on creating your team's new online interactive handbook, or maybe trying to find out where that pedometer is in your iPhone. It's the Health app, by the way, and it's white with a pink heart in the corner. You're welcome. Hopefully we've been having a lively dialogue with our live tweet here in the chat room. Better yet, hopefully the Wi-Fi in the hotel is working and I'm at least here for this presentation. Can you imagine? If so, then now's the time that I welcome any further questions. Thanks for your time and participation, and good luck on finals.